Hello, good morning everyone. Welcome to our webinar, How Design Systems Define Business Success. I'm your host today, Talon Wadsworth. I'm the lead designer for Adobe XD, and I'm just excited because today I get to do what I love to do the most, which is to talk to very talented designers and just to basically talk shop and figure out how are they solving the problems that they're facing in their teams and organizations. So this is a really exciting topic. Thank you all for tuning in, and I am sort of very excited to introduce these two very talented people here sitting with me today. Today I am joined by Haley Hughes, a design lead for Airbnb's design language based here in San Francisco. Her work has been showcased and featured in Women Who Design, 26 Innovations by 26 Innovative Women, and she's a certified IBM Enterprise Design Thinking Leader. Very interesting title. I really like that. And in her spare time, she also, spare time, what time do we have? She works on a lot of design ops projects, like redesigning the hiring process internally at Airbnb, really changing how not only how people experience Airbnb, but how they work internally. Very meta problem. I like it. Haley, thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
Yeah, is this your first time live streaming?
It's my first time.
All right, exciting,
Super excited.
exciting time. So this is going to be fun. All right, so we're gonna go talk about some fun stuff, I think. So, and then we're also joined by Sampo Jalasto.
Yep,
say it
right.
Oh my gosh, awesome, excellent. And he heads design. He's the head of design for Idean here in San Francisco. Are you based in Palo Alto?
Palo
Alto,
yeah,
yes. But he leads the design for all of North America for Idean, which is really exciting to have you here, Sampo. He is a designer. I really appreciate this, and there I am tapping my mic. But you bring both UX strategy and visual design to being a designer, which is very different because a lot of designers here choose to specialize.
Yeah. I mean that's true.
Kind of an industry
I've
thing.
kind of gone through all those different stages from working on the visuals to now kind of overseeing and leading teams. So
that's the approach I definitely agree with. So and you've worked on a lot of different projects for different platforms, and because you're an agency, you get to kind of work with a lot of different companies. Which is exciting. We were talking before, and that's kind of a lot of energy in the agency world for doing that. So and of course leading a lot of teams, but really still being hands-on. Right.
Yeah, I think as a design leader, it's still good to kind of keep a touch on what tools you use and how the teams work, and I think it sort of brings certain credibility when you can actually talk about how things are done.
Yeah, I mean, and a lot of what we're going to talk about today really is about tools and process, right? And how it's almost as important that how teams work together than what the actual design is. That's as important, right? To be able to deliver great experiences. So, so of course today we're here to talk about a very hot topic, which I'm sure we all have a lot of ideas about. Probably a lot of you out there watching, or maybe you're watching for and really trying to get some insight into this topic today. But we are going to be talking about design systems and the role that it plays kind of within design teams and large organizations. So let's just start with the basics. I'm a design leader at my company here at Adobe. Why do I need a design system, Haley? How would you pitch me on that? What's the importance of a design system for me?
Yeah, I would say that a lot of companies these days are really, competing for people's attention. And so, when there's so many different choices for folks to use different products, really making sure that, what you deliver is instantly identifiable and that it connects with your community is essential, and design systems help enable that. And I think another big thing is just that, people, they don't want to have to spend a lot of time learning your product and relearning it over and over again. So it's just really important to make sure that end-to-end experience is consistent.
So my users, the people who will be interacting with my app or my product, it's really about them. It's really about creating a great experience for them, very consistent, almost in a wayfinding kind of way. When they, it's very clear when I see this, this is from Airbnb. So
yeah, exactly.
It's really I love that perspective on it. That it is really about the consumer then, of the product and the experience. That's the importance of design systems, because I think a lot of people would maybe frame it as more of a mechanical sort of internal process kind of way. Sampo, what's the important role of design systems? So you're part of an agency, and you go out and you're working with a variety of clients and really trying to sort of assess kind of where they are and tell them about the importance of design systems and grow their adoption with their own teams.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, it varies quite a bit. We work with a lot of fairly big companies that might have dozens or sometimes even hundreds of product teams across different business units working on products for anything from enterprise, like security products into something that's more consumer facing or web facing, and then kind of like how do you kind of harmonize all of this into one? So the design system can really help bring these different units together. There's a lot of work that's kind of like right now everybody's kind of reinventing the wheel in their own kind of silos, if you will, and then design system can really bring all of that together and both increase efficiency, reduce the time that people need to spend on drawing the same components over and over. Like personally, through my career, I've drawn like a time picker element like maybe 50 times, and that's not something I wish ever to do again.
A lot of innovation in time
Sure,
pickers.
I mean, there's only so many variation, and also like sometimes that actually leads into issues because like people intuitively understand how time picker works based on the examples they see out there, and then if you try to reinvent it all the time, then you might introduce some usability issues with that.
Yeah, it can be very disruptive. Like I said, I really love that element of the design system is really about establishing great patterns, like as a way to onboard new users. Like this is the same component, this is the same interaction that you'll see kind of across, maybe not even just your own product, but across like maybe even an operating system, building on good patterns of UX and UI design. So, is a design system, and I think, Sampo, you started talking a little bit about this, but maybe Haley, with Airbnb, is a design system just for designers, or is it designers and engineers, or really talk about the importance of who's it for? Who's a design system for really inside of Airbnb?
Yeah, well, I mean, I would say that primarily our audience right now is product teams, but there are a lot of different folks on product teams, researchers, data scientists, and we're a much larger multi and interdisciplinary group. And oftentimes when we do research with our teams within the company, we'll do things like surveys or ask teams to kind of write letters about why they love the design language or why they want to break up with it. And when they do that, it's really great because we learn that almost everyone in the company uses the design language system in some way, even if it's just the primitives, the colors, the typography, and things like that. So yeah, we think that it's really for everyone, even though primarily our audiences are designers and developers.
I mean, that's one of the things I think that I didn't have a lot of knowledge into before I joined Adobe, is just how many people it takes to really produce these products and these services and these experiences, right? Like it really depends on many different disciplines really working together, and the design system ends up being kind of that nexus point, right? This shared language, right? So Sampo, in the agencies you've worked with, I mean, are you talking mainly about efficiency? Are you talking about fidelity? Like how are you talking and really pitching design systems as an important solution, to their problems?
Yeah, I think efficiency is certainly one. Consistency, I think, is a really big one as well. Just making sure that, and that's usually that executors are definitely interested in as well. Like, how do we show up as an organization? What do our products look like? And harmonizing those experiences for the end users. So I think that's really a key thing.
That's a really good point. That the consistency of experience really grounds them, really gives them trust maybe in that system, right? This is the same element that I'm going to be interacting with in the same way every time I approach it, right, as a user. So Haley, what are some of the misconceptions that you've had to? I love that there's a survey that's sent out where people can actually tell you and give you feedback around the design system. But what are some of those misconceptions? What can it do and what can't it do really?
Yeah, well, I think that over and over, a big misconception about design language systems is that they limit creativity for teams. And I actually like to think about it more like a design system really unlocks higher level creativity because in many cases, if you're working on software to help people, with their taxes or with something really, challenging, then maybe like helping, teams better manage their work, that when you're working on really, important productivity software like that you have the opportunity to really focus on the experience. How can we make this effortless, a lot easier for folks, and help them understand the different decisions that they have to make throughout the process, instead of focusing on micro details that I think the design system helps kind of solve for teams.
Yeah.
Actually, if I may.
Yeah, go ahead.
On that notion of like creativity and how it limits it, because we've kind of seen the gamut of like different types of systems and been building some of those as well. And I think it's actually interesting where kind of like the governance of the system can affect how the creativity within it actually works. We have a system that's kind of loose and people can contribute to it and kind of feel that they own, versus a system that's very rigid and kind of centrally controlled and very kind of like tightly controlled as well. But the contributions can become much harder. And in those cases, we've actually sometimes seen that like it's not always so nice to work within the confines of the system if you're forced to kind of use components that are not necessarily ideal for your particular use case or workflow.
Yeah. So there has to be this balance between sort of the closedness of the system, right? I mean, I think any creator of a brand system in the past or a design system, right? Like they want to make sure that people are using it correctly, right? But there's a real tension with the end consumer, the user of the design system, the one who has to put the pieces together, that they need to be able to contextualize and customize. And then I love that word that you said, contribute. Haley, like what are some of the processes that the team has established to again, are you finding that balance? Are you finding it, as I said, have you learned things over time in developing that?
Yeah, so I mean, I would say also, just to add one fine point on that, is that in industrial design, when you're making a chair, for example, like the manufacturing processes sort of create a lot of constraint, right? Whereas in software design, there's so much flexibility. And so we need to put constraints in place in order to focus the creativity. And, part of that contribution process at Airbnb, we've been piloting actually the past few months a new process with teams. And in the over a dozen contributions that we've gotten so far, for us, it's actually about bringing in all the innovations that are happening in the product and making sure that other teams can make use of those based on what their needs are, and help them basically scale that innovation across teams.
That's really interesting. Yeah. So the contribution model, sort of really getting that up and going, so that everybody's growing together, right? That like everybody's exposed. I mean, I think one of the biggest issues, right, is just exposure, right? Like, if I don't know that someone else has created that component before, then naturally I'm going to want to go and create that. But if I do know, maybe that helps me then accelerate my work, right, when I'm starting from scratch.
Yeah, speaking of a misconception, I mean, folks oftentimes think that a contribution process either slows them down or might block them from shipping, but we focus on talking to teams about discoverability, which is exactly what you said. How can we make sure, not limit, like we'll always up-level quality, always trying to make things better, but let's bring everything into a centralized place so that people can find it and reuse it.
Yeah, again, piggybacking on this, with one of the clients we worked with, like for the contributions, we actually set it up in a way where the ticketing system for upcoming contributions and upcoming sort of edits to the system were visible and public to all the different teams, so they could actually comment and kind of discuss those things and kind of like, raise their hand if they had something that related to that. So there are like specific ways that you can actually manage that.
Yeah, and is that something that you have iterated on over time? Because again, you are the catalyst maybe for starting the design system internally at these places?
Yeah, sometimes, and sometimes the client already has this idea of like harmonizing, but they don't necessarily know quite how to go about it.
And so have you tweaked your process as you've learned from different clients, as you learned from their experiences of implementing the design systems internally? And then does that influence the sort of the learnings, and then the next way that you help the next client sort of get
Sure,
set up?
I mean, of course, like we try to kind of utilize the organizational learnings from, we have 700 people across the globe right now, so it's a lot of people, and like we actually need to develop our systems as well in how to enable knowledge sharing better.
Yeah.
But yeah, so kind of like trying to utilize the best practices from one place to another. One of the things that I feel like has been kind of like the key theme of learning is that you can't, like as an agency, you can't go and do the work for another organization. Like you really need to partner very closely, and it's almost the client organization that needs to own the work, and we are there to support the work, and it's kind of their work and it's their system, and then we need to understand like, well, what problems is the system solving for that client? And where do we need to focus on? So it's, if anything, it's kind of like this idea that you have to always kind of have a custom way to do it, and you really need to go deep into the client's organization to understand what kind of makes a difference for them.
Yeah, but like say, probably with the agency work, you probably see that a lot. That like people do end up having some of the same problems. I mean, again, that's probably why a lot of you are tuning in today, is that you're probably running into the same problems in scaling your efforts, and bringing design to all these different surfaces and devices, and continue to grow and expand. And of course, that's where those pain points are. So I really love asking this question with people when we go out and I talk to designers about their design systems. But so tell me a little bit about the origin story of the design language at Airbnb. Like what problems really were surfacing, and what was the design language really set out to do? Like what was its origin story?
Yeah, well, I wasn't there when Airbnb started their design system a couple years ago, but from what I understand, one of the big issues that came up was that, Airbnb started as a website, and then it grew, and, experience was a mobile app, and it's on tablet, and it's across all these different platforms. And so, obviously different teams were responsible for designing different parts of the experience, and as they were all, sprinting in different schedules and stuff like that, they would ship, fractured and fragmented experiences. And so, simply aligning and enabling your organization to be able to deliver a consistent experience at the same time was really critical. And obviously Airbnb was also in hyper growth. So our, design team and our product teams were doubling and tripling in size in a very short order. And so a big piece of it also was just making sure that there was a way for everyone to stay aligned around, what our values were and how we would deliver those.
And what did that process look like in like pitching it? Like was it a very easy thing to do? Was it really down to the sort of foundational sort of principles or ideas of the company, or is this something that again had to be a big initiative? Like it really had to get a lot of people on board, and any of that process that you could share with the
Yeah, for sure. So it definitely was something that was well understood by the leaders of the organization. You probably know, but Airbnb was founded by designers who went to RISD, and so there's this kind of ingrained notion that design is important in the company. And of course, when they got started, there was a team of folks that came from across the company to kind of self-organize, and it really came out of a product refresh. So, they wanted to refresh the app, they wanted to reinvent the guest experience, and so the system was an abstraction of components and principles and things like that came directly from a product redesign. And then driving adoption across teams, I think, was the next big step.
Yeah, well, it's pretty easy when your co-founders are designers themselves, and of course, designers I think we as designers, I think we see the importance of and the value in it. But Sampo, maybe from your experience, because you're kind of coming in a little sometimes retroactively, right? You're trying to make sense of these pieces and maybe interacting with a company that doesn't quite understand some of those values and principles, right? So how do you get into those problems and try and talk to people about the value of design systems?
That's a good question. I think it really varies with who we are partnering with on the client's organization. We usually come in where there's some sort of a identified issue or like an effort to harmonize, the offering of what an organization has. And there might actually be already some efforts in individual silos or business units where they've started kind of like creating a system for their product. But then some central authority, maybe there's a new employee, new VP of design. And I think we see a lot of that a lot of companies are now appreciating design as a term, they think they need to be more design oriented, but they don't actually know quite how to do that. And a design system is a very practical way of kind of establishing better design maturity, but it's not the only way, and you cannot just force a design maturity into an organization through a design system. So it can definitely be a catalyst for a lot of those things. But then going about how do we sort of make the stakeholders buy into it, and how do we secure a budget? Which I think was the original question. I think, again, it's really about partnering with the client and kind of going deeply into their organization, understanding, kind of, adopting the human-centric approach to that problem as well, to really understand, what problems is this design system going to solve for them. For example, it might be between the handover between designers and engineers. It might be the inconsistency across products. Might be a lot of time wasted by individual designers, designing the same buttons over and over. So kind of trying to get to those types of numbers and kind of ideas of like, well, how much time are we spending here? If every designer is spending 5 minutes a day, redesigning a button, then that's 100 designers overall across whole year.
Yeah.
And scale it up to what you pay for them, then again you can reach some numbers that way. They're a little bit naive, I think, but like I think that you kind of have to have some justification as well.
Yeah. Do you find that as well, Haley? I mean, because that is a really interesting angle, and I want to make sure I had this other point I want to get back to. But that one is an interesting angle again because we are talking about business success, right? Mm-hmm. And so is that efficiency when it comes to managing resources a big motivating factor at Airbnb for their design system, or do you like how much what kind of percentage would you put on like something like that kind of concern for the design language at Airbnb?
Yeah, I would say that it's pretty high.
Yeah.
The design system team built a utility within our app where you can track the components that are created by teams and the components that are system components. So I can open up Airbnb on my app and see the utilization of our system in real time. And one thing that we track is, that over 60% across platforms of system components are actually shipped in the product. And that's a really important number for us because it lets us know that, half of teams' time is being spent creating new components from scratch, and it means they're working also twice as fast to go to market. And so I think that those really are compelling reasons why a business leader would keep funding a design system.
Yeah, that really makes sense. But it also I think maybe gets to something that we didn't touch on, but some of the misconceptions that are really going out there in the community right now is like, well, again, technically, what is a design system, right? Is it just about those design components, or we're talking here about efficiency because it's being connected to code that is shipping. These components are actually out there shipping in the products. So define a design system in the mechanical parts. Maybe we just take a little sidebar and talk about that specifically. Sampo, you go in. What are you trying to help those clients set up? What are the mechanical pieces of that? The deliverables, really.
Right. Okay. So that's in our framework. That's one of 4 things. Is that, and I'll get back to that later. But then the other 3 are. You also need to think about how do you govern the design system. So what's the sort of mechanism for taking in contributions or pushing updates? Then you need to think about the communication and the training. So how do you actually talk about the design system? How do you get the adoption started? What sort of channels do you need to identify within the organization to use? How do you both talk about it but also involve others in it? And then principles is the 4th one. So then that's more kind of going into the basics of why do we have this design system? What does it stand for? What is our brand like? What are our products about? And establishing kind of those key principles that you can always go back to, the foundational things. And then the tools and the components and all those practical things, that's the 4th item. So it's it's 4 things that you need to consider. And then within that tools section, there's a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
So you could have anything from, I guess, most typical way to look at it would be the components, shared components that create the system together. Basic interactive components, ideally in code. Of course, you could also, when you start out, you might not have them in code immediately, but if that's kind of what you need to build towards. There might be, there might be actual sketch libraries or Adobe XD libraries or whatever design tooling itself. There might be processes in there as well to think about personas, journey maps, workshop exercises. In a way, design system can sort of have everything about a design in an organization in it, but it also can be very kind of focused on just one set of things and kind of focused on the components. But the components, I think, is the common denominator.
Yeah. Well, I like what you were saying about, again, really exposing that it takes more than just, say, a library of components, whether in a design document or in code, that it really is this sort of holistic sort of way of communicating, right? Value, and really communicating those ideals and the ways that the pieces fit together, right? Communication is a lot of what we're doing here with design systems. And I like how you're talking about all the different surfaces and the ways in which you're sort of trying to help the client, be set up to do that. to really be able to communicate the value to the rest of the organization.
And all that is actually like, as an agency, it's not, we can't own the communication for them. So that's where we need to partner with very closely with the team.
Well, I like that because you're really spelling it out. Like these are the pieces that are needed. Again, maybe not just as going in, the client might have a very small slice of that in mind, but it's like, no. To do this right, you need this. So, Haley, I was wondering maybe if you could share, because Airbnb has been, I think, one of the leaders in this area in establishing a lot of these patterns and these ways of communicating. But what are some of the tools? You mentioned the survey tool, but what are some of the tools that sort of make up the ecosystem of the design language, both internally and externally? Like, what are some of those tools that the team has built up? Not just the design components and the components and code, but what are some of the other elements, the other pieces of that larger system?
Well, we use a lot of collaborative design software that enables folks to dive in and work together on designs. We found that, in particular, content strategists come into the process a lot earlier and start, really being able to invent, thoughtful copy right in some of the earlier stages of the design. And we create a lot of internal tools, so we even have created some speculative prototypes around democratizing the design process a little more and creating kind of a symbol set that allows your engineer to kind of sketch something on a whiteboard and then be able to quickly translate something like that to our UI components, and so building out those flows faster. There's a lot of different types of things that we try to do that really have to do with addressing what we see when we research how our teams are working, and so that's a big, huge part of our process.
Research. Tell maybe just a little quickly. Tell us a little bit about those efforts. Like I said, you mentioned the survey, but do you have researchers who are going and almost talking to the product teams as if they were users or clients, really, of the system, right?
Yeah, we do a lot of unique kinds of qualitative and quantitative research, but I think some examples might be role-playing exercises where we'll ask a designer to be kind of like an old-timer teaching a newcomer, and like without being able to look at the design system, to explain how it works, and we gather a lot of feedback that way. We also bring in, obviously, end users, hosts and guests, and do research with them, and also really try to design with underrepresented communities and people with disabilities as well, to invent our kind of illustration style and represent folks in a way that's faithful to their lived experience. So. Yeah, those are really exciting pieces of the design system. I think it's a common misconception that teams might not staff a design system team with research. Usually visual design, UX design, but it's a missed opportunity. It's really essential in order to really understand how to tap into user needs.
Yeah.
So on that note, actually, like one thing comes to mind, which is like, is there in your mind, like, is there a distinction between, actually at Airbnb, is there a distinction between a brand system or brand language and the design system overall? Is that the same thing?
I think that, again, the design system is just an expression of the intent behind the brand values, and our brand team and our product team work inseparably on delivering that throughout different parts of the end-to-end experience.
Yeah. So I think, like, going to your illustrations, which I've read about and seen a lot of the great work you've done there for inclusivity, but that could be also kind of like in brands territory, if you will. Not that we necessarily want to kind of like have territories, but like it's just an interesting thought in general. Like, is there going to be, going 5 years from now, like, do we still have a distinction between brand language and design system language for products, or is that the same thing?
That's a good question. I mean, we're facing some of those same questions here at Adobe. And actually, it was the brand team, our internal design brand team, that was actually the initiators of our design system language, Spectrum, right? But I wonder, Haley, again, just to kind of set everybody's expectations. Like, this has been something Airbnb has been focused on for many years now. You think a lot of the things you're doing now is really due to the maturity of the system and also the learnings over time, or again, was this all sort of concepted this way from the beginning? Did you kind of have, like, I mean, do you want to speak to any of that, like how it has changed over time and the pieces that you've added as different problems have arisen?
Yeah. Well, I would say that some qualities are enduring. This idea of trust between strangers and universal belonging has kind of been baked into the DNA of how Airbnb was started. And so I think as a part of that, there's a certain kind of designer that we hire for that has inclusivity in mind, and that becomes a part of the ethos of the work itself.
Yeah.
But like you said, over time, you recognize, that as the design system is maturing, that there are these opportunities to think bigger and to focus not just on reducing the amount of effort somebody, might put into using your product, but really focusing on, again, human rights. What are the, things that help people feel like they're, represented faithfully in the work, and how can you make sure that they have access to the things that they need in order to have a magical trip.
Yeah, yeah. Sampo, I mean, would you go and talk to clients? Are they all facing similar problems? Are there ones that have are there slightly different problem sets? And like, how have you, like, kind of asking your own question back at you, like will brand start to bleed more into the overall sort of design system and design language? Like, and is that what clients are you seeing those trends with the clients that you're working with?
Well, I think it's always kind of like that. There's many questions there in one, but kind of answering the last one first, I think it's there's always some tension between like what we usually partner with the product organization or some design leaders in the product organization that are kind of in a more like a centralized role, and I think there's always tension between them and the brand. Not always. It varies a little bit, but it's there's often some. And kind of coming to the ownership perhaps of like how we go about doing things. And then when you look at like traditional branding work, it falls short usually on helping design good, accessible digital products. If you take something like a color system that is included in a brand, sometimes we see like, okay, the client has black, white, and red, and that's it. And there's no hues that you can work with. So then if you want to scale that up into an accessible design system that people can, might be looking at dashboards. You don't want all those charts to be just red. So you need to kind of challenge some of those things that are sometimes very inherent or very kind of like tightly controlled. And then you really need to work with the brand because like they have a voice too, and you can't just dismiss all the work that has been done previously, and you need to partner very closely with them to kind of help them see like what you need to build towards.
Yeah.
Something that Sampo said that resonated with me is that we also experienced that at Airbnb, and there's a lot of beautiful photography that's taken by our brand department, and what's wonderful is that we want that experience in product, but there's also performance trade-offs, and there's questions about color contrast, as Sampo mentioned. So I think tooling is a great place to start to kind of bridge that gap. We've been building out these what we call these linters, like accessibility linter, that as a designer you can go in and you set your type, and it actually shows at the pixel level whether or not your color contrast is meeting all around the edges of every letter form, instead of it just being like, oh, it's passing or failing. And so building in some of those nuances to the tools can help folks make better design decisions.
That was, you bring up accessibility. That was exactly one of the areas where, again, you sort of see the influence of these UX, UI best practices actually influencing the overall brand. Right, we sort of had some established sort of color values, like in our UI at Adobe, but what our design system, Spectrum, has given us a chance to do is actually influence that, like based on accessibility being one of those metrics now. Again, that's being tracked and being owned by the design system, and then that influences our brand kind of the other way as well, like our overall sort of sort of aesthetic brand of the applications. So that is one of those areas where, I think I'm glad you mentioned that, where again, like as these things run up against each other, right, it's a collaborative effort. There's trade-offs. There's influence back and forth.
Yeah, one thing I would just add to that too is in our research, we recently were working with guests and understanding, how they understood what was happening in the UI, and we learned that, for example, our iconography helped folks who have low vision, be able to zoom in and kind of get a quick read on what the label was and what the intention was and how many pieces of information they were deciding between. And then it also helped our folks who were English as their second language recognize what the differences were between the different category items. So really just having a deeper understanding of how your icon sizes and your different primitives serve different communities in different ways really helps you make kind of decisions about what's best for everyone.
Yeah, we've done some of those tests as well where, like a global organization, they need to have products for 30 different markets, and then testing out like what icons actually mean in a given culture and context. So.
Yeah, no, again, I like that positive influence, right? So it's kind of, maybe it's this virtuous circle. Maybe it's not so one that one will supplant the other, but they influence each other and they all grow together, because the ways in which our customers are experiencing their products and services from all these companies now really is through these digital interactive experiences, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, very nice. There's one thing I wanted to go back to, because I was actually kind of interested in a lot of our learnings are based on personal experience. And there's something you mentioned, Sampo, about someone coming in and the new person.
Yeah.
That there's such a sort of energy in the new person, just trying to get the lay of the land.
Yes.
That really drives, I think, a lot of the motivation behind establishing design system. I remember that was kind of my first experience. I joined when I first joined the Adobe Design organization. These projects were sort of already going, and I had to make sense of it. Like, well, how do I design successful? And I ended up being kind of the librarian, or kind of the one who was bringing together all these components, just to try and make sense of this world, So what was kind of Haley, what was kind of your first experience? What really built up a strong case for the need and the role of design systems for you personally as a designer?
Well, I mean, starting at Airbnb, I remember what I loved about, working on the design language at IBM and then coming to a new organization was that I was starting over, right? You kind of are the newcomer. And so I embraced that. And I think the thing that I'll always remember is when I opened the files and I looked at, what we had available for sticker sheets and templates and stuff, I would kind of, ask questions to the team like, I see that we can use, gradients. So when should I use them? And I remember someone saying, use it in a special moment. And I said, a special moment for whom? And so I started realizing that our system hadn't been fully rationalized, and there were opportunities to build more logic and more documentation in the why behind the decisions in these UX patterns and in the UI styling. And I thought that I think that part of it is always bringing that kind of set of fresh eyes and that beginner's mindset to the system, even if you've been working on it for a really long time, is pretty critical.
Yeah, I totally agree. How about you, Sampo? What was your kind of first experience or your first pain point where you thought, you know what I need? I need a good design system.
Yeah, so I guess working as a designer for over a decade and kind of going through designing products for multiple platforms, there's you have consistent issues just with your own work. Well, at least I did.
Very true.
I worked for 3 months on a project. I designed a button 3 months ago. Now I'm 3 months further, and I think my aesthetic has matured during that time. So I'll just do something else now. And you're actually creating that chaos as you do that. So first is how do you sort of have some more order to what you're doing, and then that just kind of multiplies when you have a team working together of designers and them following a consistent sort of a map or an idea, and making sure that whatever they output is cohesive and unified. And then beyond that, I think there's also for me a lot of the issues in not working with design systems or kind of working in a waterfall mode, if you will, is that once you've done the beautiful designs and you hand over the developers, they are just looking at images of what the actual product is going to be, and then they try to replicate it, and they might not always succeed so well. And as an agency, we might not even be involved at that stage with the client, and it really just hurts to kind of see all the kind of thinking and all the detail and attention to detail kind of go to waste. Not always, but just this idea that you need these systems to be able to better work together as designers and developers, and you together build the system, you build the products with the system, and then ultimately create better experience for end users. So I think like a lot of those things, and there's just a ton of inefficiencies in how designers have been working for a long time. And it's, just seeing some sort of a fix into some of those things through a design system, I think is great.
Yeah, it's really when you get the success and you see those outcomes, right? That, again, that's through experience. And I think, one of the things that design systems is really doing is really trying to establish, some best practices, right? That it is taking some of this, maybe it's this collective experience that we have and trying to produce, great digital experiences, right? I mean, I remember, just not being really shocked when I couldn't, communicate well enough to my developers to execute on that vision that I had. And it was only, again, through the hard work and some of those pain points of, collaboration that led to a great solution in the end, but it was painful, I think, and taking that learning and then the next time we do it better, It seems like there's definitely some themes around design systems, like, helping us solve a lot of those issues.
Sure. I remember like specifically, it was maybe 12 years ago or so, we were doing a platform design for a mobile device, and I ended up writing 600 pages of specs in a Word document, in Word tables. And that was so painful. So like not having to go through that again ever, I think it's just a value.
It's a good motivation. It's a good motivator for sure.
Yeah, I would also add, and I mean, maybe this isn't touched upon very often, but it seems like really thinking about our flexibility of our workspace environment is also really important for nurturing healthy design systems. So, enabling designers and developers to sit next to each other and pair design, pair program, or, to work in an iterative fashion. I know that, having things like movable whiteboards or desks that, people can kind of have neighbor desks and then they can sit at another desk the next day. A lot of that kind of also, I think, getting the work up on the walls and having other people walk by and see what other teams are doing also helps, people see, oh, this team's working on something we're working on. Let's, systematize that. Let's bring it back together.
We should work together on this.
That's right. Yeah.
I mean, you're pointing out something that I think that cannot be understated is that, again, a design system, even establishing one, is not going to solve all your problems, right? That at the end of the day, like a design system establishes a shared language, shared principles, things that we can build great collaborative relationships on top of, right?
Yeah.
That's really what it's all about, I guess, in the end. At least for the creatives and the engineers and the makers and the people who are in there trying to just do great work.
Right, and I think also the culture should help, influence the infrastructure. It shouldn't necessarily be, okay, well, the infrastructure dictates the culture, and so how can you, help make sure that, you understand the different values and symbols and practices of a culture and want to make that great, and then figure out the things you need in order to enable it.
Yeah, that's a great point. I really like that. So, we've established our design systems. Everybody's working really well together. Everyone's not recreating the button. We're doing a good job. So, Sampo, for you, when you're exiting from these client relationships, what does success look like for you when it comes to design systems? Like how do you define that?
I think adoption, and then this notion that it's an ongoing thing that people are working towards making better, and there's resources sort of dedicated to it. I think those kinds of things. You see that there's actually like a community that's coming together in building it. Like design system itself doesn't need to be perfect, and it's never going to be perfect. It's going to be in a constant stage of evolution through as long as an organization exists, in my mind, or at least delivers digital products and services. So I think it's more about that community coming together and seeing that, okay, now you guys are comfortable kind of building this on your own. I think that's really where we aim to be.
Yeah, no, that's a great scenario for anyone to be in. Yeah, I think that's great. Haley, same question for you. Like, what does success look like? And when maybe you could speak to also the the customer, the end user, like of the products that your team is creating? Like, what does success look like for them as well?
Yeah, well, I think a couple things on the internally, in-house,
Yeah.
you know, one big signal, especially as your design system is maturing, is that, you know, as you evolve, there's a lot that you have to do in terms of managing change, right? People's expectations and their timelines are oftentimes very different than when you decide to majorly release a new version of the design language system. So, you know, really measuring kind of that team productivity and that sense of, you know, whether or not the system has created churn, I think is really important to making sure that it's something that's healthy, as well as, again, how many contributions you're getting back and how many of those things are making it into the system also shows that there's this innovation cycle happening. And then from an end user perspective, I would just say that one of the things that I would really look at as a design system team is, you know, how many people are you affecting and are you expanding your markets? So, you know, I mean, again, for Airbnb, you know, over half of the people that use it, maybe English is not their first language. And so are we doing right to left languages, you know, supporting a variety of different needs that people have in our community, and how are we expanding as a result of that?
So, I mean, really, you know, customer success is design system success in the end, right?
For sure.
It's a really nice way to wrap it up. Let's see. I had a couple other questions. And what is the most surprising thing that you've learned, like, in this journey so far? Maybe Sampo, like, you know, maybe some of those. Yeah, you've maybe interacted with a lot of clients at this point. You've done it a few times. Like, what are the things that still surprise you?
I think it's like a key thing being that it's about the people, really. Like, it's about the adoption. It's about not so much about, like, it's very easy to get into the mode of just thinking about the tools and the you know, the components and building some perfect artifact, and not including people. So I think that's just kind of, it's not necessarily a surprise anymore, but like, it's been surprising working through this how much it is more about the people and involving them and creating these communities and making sure that they are actually, you know, invested, interested, and willing to kind of build this system for themselves. And ultimately, if you think about a design system, again, kind of like the very basic notion is the components, but then it can be very transformational for an organization as well, if you get people involved, because it's about how do we work together, what do we deliver for our end users, and how do I work, and how do I need to change to, you know, work in this new environment. So a lot of those things.
Yeah, I mean, we are faced with such rapid change, right? That to just say that a design system is about the component or the tool or the framework, right, is really selling it short and really probably limiting its impact long term, right? If you sort of go all in on one specific solution rather than building up an ecosystem of, you know, sort of, you know, feedback and development and contribution, right? Then you're really then locked into and actually, you know, probably exhibiting the worst behaviors, like, of frameworks, like the worst characteristics, I should say, of what a framework has to offer, right? You know, how do you see, you know, the design language at Airbnb continuing to evolve, Haley? Like, what's next, really?
Yeah. Well, when we're on the ground with teams, I think one thing that we see a lot is that they're starting to work with their cross business partners in departments you wouldn't expect. So our legal team, our finance team, our, you know, policy writing teams, because a lot of those folks, you know, help decide, you know, like pricing structures or business models or, you know, things that actually affect the end user experience. And so as these teams are all starting to collaborate, they are needing a rally point or a North Star where they can have still conversations around human needs. And that, for Airbnb, has been the journey. At first, it was the Snow White journey, where our CEO hired some Pixar illustrators to put together a unified host and guest experience. But now, you know, our teams and our business has grown significantly, and so teams are mapping these, and they're sometimes in Excel spreadsheets, sometimes they're using other design tools, and they're collaborating together to work on those. And I also see a next chapter for design systems where people are focused on the value systems of design systems. So different, like I said, different human rights. And I think that, you know, data models and ethics and other things will come into play where, designers will be responsible for governing more complex decision making.
Yeah, definitely. Sam, did you have something to add? Sorry, you kind of, I knew you had a thought there, but I was like, Haley.
No, I think it's just interesting how it's sort of like, again, like starting to involve everybody. And in a way, like you guys are probably one of the first organizations that's been living with a design system for several years. So I think kind of like it's good to kind of look at Airbnb as potential of like where all these other companies might be growing towards. Yeah. And I think, again, the system doesn't necessarily need to design system. Like sometimes I feel like we're kind of like maybe raising it too high on a pedestal, but then maybe not. Like it really kind of like varies, I think. Yeah. Like it's interesting how it sort of like brings up these conversations and kind of like helps different units.
One of the things that I've been thinking about as we've been talking is that there's something really about leadership, like in design systems, right? As a good leader knows how to scale, knows how to enable those that are the next wave of leadership, knows really how to enable them to do their best work and continue to contribute and evolve the system. And that this is about growing, together. And I think the qualities of bad leadership are really when you don't do that, when you can't scale yourself, right? When you constrict the process and you micromanage it. And I think the best systems are going to be the ones that can enable teams and companies to grow and to evolve and to continue to adapt to the new problems being faced.
I totally agree. And I would also add too, as you're talking about that, I think great leaders understand that it's not about hierarchy and reporting chains, and what it's really about is that we're trying our best not to ship our org chart, right? I think in the future design systems teams could actually help influence the way that companies are structured by helping understand what we're trying to deliver holistically in a product. So not to be too ambitious, but it seems like an opportunity.
Something to shoot for,
right?
For sure. Yeah, it's great. Well, we wanted to give a chance to also maybe answer some questions from some of the viewers who are out there. Because again, usually on live streaming, like I said, I'm interacting with the chat in real time. It's a little bit different scenario, but we do have some questions from the audience that maybe we could answer here for the next few minutes here. So Rebecca Hart, who's been joining us here on the chat, she had a couple questions. I think some of the basics, right? How do you start with creating a design system? Like what do you start with? Like, again, very complex set of problems. How do you break it down? Where's a great starting point, Sampo?
Yeah, for us, what we actually need to do first is we need to understand the organization, the client organization, again, like what is the problem that the design system is attempting to solve and why is that even the right solution? So as we start the engagements, we need to talk to the different business units in an organization. We need to understand the branding. We need to understand kind of the background of the organization, their business. We need to understand how the product teams actually work. There's always kind of typically, if you have an organization that doesn't have a design maturity or design system yet, there might be different levels of maturity in different product teams. Some are already kind of experimenting, maybe building their own design system, and need to then also bring them together. So the first part is kind of understanding like who to involve. And then like how do you go about it? And there's many other ways to start as well. I think as a product team or a designer in a product team, you may want to just start with the product team. But I think the challenge that we didn't really actually touch on too much is like design systems ultimately need their own teams, and they need people who kind of have that holistic oversight of the entire organization. If you live in a product team and you're just focused on like feature development or that product, you tend to be pretty narrow, like you might be kind of working with blinders. And then the system is more kind of focused on that product and it doesn't necessarily scale. So you kind of need to be able to look, different levels, different perspectives.
And that's, again, I think that's one of the superpowers of designers. Not to, boast too much about our superpowers, but I do think that we connect the dots very well. So Haley, Rebecca had another one, which you touched on a little bit, but how does your team communicate changes and updates to the design systems?
Well, it's been really interesting because in the current process of kind of reinventing different parts of the system, we've started to build out an actual communication strategy. There's a cadence. We have lots of different channels, we find that, that there's a lot of resilience in diversity and having, whether it's using Slack or whether it's having a, head of design presenting to the larger audience, or, using remote methods for communication to make sure that all of our global offices are aware of change. For us, it's more about making sure that, what is appropriate for different audiences and stakeholders is something that we have on a calendar and that we're actually tracking who are the key messages for. And we tend to have kind of these three kind of core audiences. One is the actual teams themselves. One is the larger kind of management structure and folks who are going to be helping guide those teams. And then our leadership and executive level, what kinds of messages are going to resonate with them.
So it's really a coordinated effort across all these different surfaces and channels to make sure that people are aware and that the changes are documented and then sent out in a timely manner.
It's very systematic.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. And also you need to keep in mind what are the channels that you keep open to these different stakeholders. So how do you get the feedback from the stakeholders of the makers or the product teams?
Yeah.
I would highlight too that, it's really important to know that teams have a choice to use your system or not. And so really understanding the right tone to communicate to them is pretty essential, because they're ultimately the decision makers for their own, workplace environment.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's not a top-down mandate.
Right.
It really needs to be something everyone's bought into and sees the value in, and then really knows when to break as needed. Right. Yeah. Here's another question from Crystal C. And this is a pretty tactical one as well. Is like, how do you know when you need a design system? Like, are there some, is there like a growth point or like a scaling point? Like, when does the investment in design systems start to make sense?
Yeah, I guess, that depends as well. I think very easy way to do it is just to take inventory of what does your product reality look like right now? Like, take, 9 of your most popular products, take, from out of those, take, few of the most used screens, then pick up specific buttons and components and just put them all in a big sheet, put them on the wall and compare what that looks like. So that's one. The other thing is kind of just looking at how do designers and developers actually work together right now, and what are the efficiencies or disefficiencies, is that a word?
Inefficiencies. Yes. Yeah. No, that's a good point. Haley, do you think there is a scale is really the marker of this? I mean, again, a small startup might have different goals in mind than a large company. Like, what do you think is that turning point? Where design system, the investment in design systems becomes worth it.
Well, I even think that, a very small company, even if you're only a few designers, could benefit from a design system very early on, like at the beginning of making anything, because ultimately you do need to align around a set of shared principles. And from those principles, you should be able to then define how they manifest in, all of these different pieces and parts we're talking about. But I actually think that, when we, even in my work at IBM, when we started, building our design language there wasn't any components for our first release. Our first release was more about what is the desired user experience. Whether we design for it or not, there's a getting started experience, there's an end of use experience and a productivity, all those different things. So how do we want to show up in those places? And then just, starting there and having those conversations and writing them down became the impetus for, okay, now how do we express that?
Yeah, I think that really resonates with me, because I think, pulling it out of a design system is the UI kit, or a design system is the components and code, that it's really about establishing like a shared language. And then that's the thing that, again, even if you were to rip it all out and start over again, what you're not going to be able to, if you don't have it from the get-go, good established languages, like, you're not going to be able to ever get over that inefficiency of just not being able to communicate around shared ideals.
Right. And go ahead, Michael.
So kind of going back to the original question a little bit, like, when do you know you need a design system? So I think it's also inherently about scale. So if you're just a small startup, a few designers, one product, maybe you don't need a design system, but you should still kind of be intentional about like what your product stands for. You should have a way to bring in new designers into working on it or develop new features. You should at least have a sticker sheet of some sort. And then, then you have to see like whether it makes sense to build that into a fully fledged design system. But I think like what's often lost in this discussion is that like design systems vary depending on the size and the needs of the company. So if there's something like Google's material design, they need to have a design system for, thousands and thousands of developers who develop, applications for their platform. And they want those to feel cohesive. So that's a little bit different of a problem.
Yeah.
I guess with IBM as well, like, hundreds of product teams, but also a lot of partners. So it's just like sometimes you gotta like chunk these all into one, but it's really like there's a big scale as to what design system really needs to be.
I mean, I think thinking about the goals that you and your team have, right? You need to find the right tools to help you achieve those goals. And at the end of the day, design systems is a tool, and you need to make sure that it fits with the problems that you're facing. So yeah. Well, thank you both for joining us. This was it's such an enjoyable hour spent with both of you, and I hope you all enjoyed it out there joining us here at the webinar. Be sure to check out, of course, the ebook, Hack the Design System, a collaborative effort between Idean and Adobe, and it's available to everyone today. Very exciting, and I believe you're both involved in some way in there. Yes, indeed. So be sure to look for it. There's some really great insights in there, and feel free to reach out to us on Twitter or anywhere else. And said we always love hearing from you. And thank you so much for joining us for the webinar this morning. And we hope you success on your next initiatives. So thanks so much.